Well, again, I'm sorry that we couldn't meet last week. And obviously, I'm not 100% recovered, but I'm going to do the best I can. And I feel much better. I appreciate your being here. In our course, we make a big shift in our emphasis. Until now, we've been reading about mankind in general. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and talked about Noah and the Noahide code, which applied to all mankind. But now we're going to focus on the Jewish people, a particular small nation that began in the Middle East. And we're going to be talking today about the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the founding figures in the creation of the Jewish people. In order not to shock you, I'm going to warn you ahead of time that we're going to be looking at clay feet. We talk about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as being the great founders of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, it's only during my own lifetime and yours that finally, in many of the synagogues in the country and in the world, including our own, we finally begin to speak about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Before this generation, we as Jews never publicly acknowledged the role of the matriarchs in the establishment of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, I confess, the first time I heard it, I was shocked. Nobody warned me ahead of time. It was not approved by the board of the congregation. It was just done. I was not the only one shocked. We were just so unused to it. Not only all of our lives, my life, but literally, not just for centuries, but for thousands of years. When the prayer began to be written and recited, it was always Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Ve'Elohei Yaakov. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. What I want to point out today to you, and this might still come as a shock. If it were up to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there never would have been a Jewish people. It never would have happened. And now I'm going to point that out to you from the text itself and from what we know. First of all, our focus now is on the Fertile Crescent, that great band of land starting from the southern tip of the Euphrates River in what is today Iraq, all the way along the riverbed of the Euphrates, from Iraq to Syria, and then down from Syria into Lebanon, and then Israel, and then Egypt. The two anchors of the Fertile Crescent were Babylonia and Egypt. From ancient times on, the trend of movement of people in the Middle East was from the east to the west, from Babylon to Egypt. You had many, many empires, one after another. The Babylonian Empire, the Syrian Empire, Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire. All of them began in the east, went along the Fertile Crescent, and ended up in Egypt. Interestingly enough, in Egyptian history, Egypt only once conducted a military campaign eastward, never getting as far as Babylon, but certainly as far as Syria. The primary military activity in the ancient world was aggressively from the east to the west, not the other way around. Why do you think that happened that way? Why were all the wars of conquest from Babylon to Egypt and not from Egypt to Babylon? The answer is very simple. While both Babylon and Egypt were wealthy, powerful countries because of their water resources, the Nile River and the Euphrates River. Of the two, always Egypt was the great center of wealth and power, much more so than Babylon. But Egypt primarily followed a policy of self-defense. They knew that other countries were going to invade them, and so they prepared elaborate defenses. One of the best elements that Egypt had for its defense was the Sinai Desert. The Sinai Desert was virtually impenetrable. It was, as it's described in the Bible, a fearsome and awful place. There was only one way that you could avoid crossing the Sinai, and that was along the coast. And along the coast, Egypt built powerful fortresses to prevent invasions. And they controlled entry into Egypt from Syria, Babylon, from the east. It's only in modern times, when you think about it, that you ever had a successful military campaign going westward through the Sinai, and that was by Israel in the Sinai campaign of 1956. What enabled Israel to accomplish that in 1956, when for so many thousands of years it was impossible? One thing. What do you think it was?
Airplanes.
Air power. When you have air power, mountains and deserts don't count that much. So, the story of the Jewish people begins in Sumer, S-U-M-E-R, the southern tip of Babylon. The city of Ur. And we know exactly where Ur is. It's been excavated. A man by the name of Abraham lived in Ur, at the very eastern tip of the Fertile Crescent. And he made the long trek from Ur to Palestine, to Hebron. Now, I had always thought, because I didn't pay much attention, but I had always thought because I read all the stories that the rabbis wrote about Abraham, that he grew up in Ur, and that he became a monotheist. And they tell stories about Abraham that his father had a business, an idol business. He made idols for sale. And one day, Abraham was in his father's store, and his father left him in charge for a while he went out. And Abraham, being a curious child, started playing with the idols. He picked up one of the idols, and it slipped out of his hand and fell and broke. My God, that's $10. What's my dad going to say when he finds out that I dropped the idol and broke it? A big whipping. So what did he do? Being a smart little kid, he said to his father, "You know what, Dad? One of the other idols picked up this one and threw it down and broke it." He got a whipping anyway. But the idea apparently stuck to him. If my father can believe that, all these people are believing nonsense. There is no such thing. That's the kind of stories that I read. Many of you, I'm sure, heard the same kind of stories. And so I thought that when Abraham grew up, he decided, enough of this nonsense. I'm leaving this whole world of idols in which I live, and I'm going to the land of Israel to proclaim the one God of the universe. An act of enormous bravery and courage. Then I have to confess, in my mind, I was thinking about my great-grandfather, who became a Zionist. And in his family, they were not Zionists. And he wanted to go to Israel. And he had to secretly leave his family and wander by foot from Hungary to Israel. That was bravery and courage. And in my mind, I thought, just like Abraham. But that's not what happened. If you read the text of the Bible, and I'm reading from it, chapter 11, verse 31. It says, Terach took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and the rest of the family, and set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. It wasn't Abraham who did it. It was his father Terach who took him. It doesn't say that he even consulted with Abraham. This was Terach's idea, not Abraham's idea. That's what it says. So immediately in my mind, Abraham's reputation goes down a bit. However, Terach went as far as Haran in what is now Syria and settled there. By that time, Abraham grew up, and there he indeed left his father and went down to the land of Israel. Good. When he got down to the land of Israel, it wasn't a land flowing with milk and honey. There was a famine. And so we read on in the Bible that he went to Egypt to get food because that was a wealthy and settled land. But when he got to the border of Egypt, he had a problem. He was probably a member of a caravan that got to the border of Egypt. And they were stopped at the border. And Egypt did not particularly welcome immigrants. Certainly not from Asia. And the Bible says that Abraham was married to Sarai. There were two things about Sarai that the Bible mentions. Number one, she's one of the very few people in the Bible that is actually described as being beautiful, very attractive. And the other thing about her, she was barren. She could not have children. It's quite a combination. So when he got to the border, she obviously attracted attention. And he said that she was his sister. His Bible says specifically, he said she was his sister because he was afraid that if he told them that she was his wife, that he would be killed and she would be taken to the Pharaoh's court. There are all kinds of immigrants. There are healthy immigrants and unhealthy immigrants. There are beautiful immigrants and ugly immigrants. Strangely enough, beautiful, healthy immigrants, barren women, were immediately chosen for the Pharaoh's harem. And he went along with her as her brother. Then the Bible goes on to say he became very wealthy. How did Abraham become wealthy? Almost overnight. You don't have to be a Nobel Prize winner to understand how he became wealthy. He came in as an immigrant with a beautiful wife who enters the harem and becomes wealthy. But God punished Pharaoh for having taken someone's wife. And the conversation goes on in the Bible. Pharaoh says to Abraham, "Why did you lie to me? Why did you pass her off as your sister? And now God has punished me." And Abraham said, "Well, I was afraid." And Pharaoh said, "You did a terrible thing. Get out of here." So he sent out Abraham and his wife. But the Bible makes the point, Abraham left a wealthy man with his wife. There was a word that I wanted to use, but then I didn't want to use it, about Abraham. And I still don't want to use it, but I want to do it because I want to shock you. Abraham was a pimp. That's what he did. He became a wealthy man off of his wife in the harem of Pharaoh. My estimation goes down another notch. So he goes back to the land of Israel. Now, a wealthy man, a flock of sheep and goats and so on. But no child. And God had promised him, "Not only will I give you the land of Israel, but you will have a very large progeny of children." And Abraham turns to God and he said, "Where are my children? I don't have one." So God said, "Have faith, have patience. It will happen." But nothing happened. So Sarai, who is a devoted wife, suggests to Abraham that he take on Hagar, who was a servant of Sarah, and have a child with Hagar. There is not a word in the Bible of any protest on the part of Abraham. Nothing like, "Oh, Sarah, let's keep trying. God promised, eventually it'll happen." Not a word like that. Took her 1, 2, 3. Sure enough, they had a child, a boy. When she was pregnant with the child, all of a sudden the Bible says that she began to act superior to Sarai. Sarai didn't tolerate that. And she finally confronted Abraham, and she said to him, Abraham, this cannot go on. I know that I made a suggestion, but I made a mistake. I never expected her to then become active in that way towards me. You have to make a decision. It's me or her. So, brave and courageous Abraham said, whatever you want here, do what you want. So what did she do? She sent away pregnant Hagar into the wilderness. And then, of all things, an angel, a messenger of God, comes to Hagar and said, Hagar, go back, swallow it. Do what you have to do to remain in Abraham's household, because you will give birth to a child who will be the father of a great nation. And you will call his name Ishmael, meaning God will hear. So she does what the angel says and comes back and has Ishmael. Now you have a very happy household. Abraham and two happy wives, hating each other and unhappy with him. Finally, Hagar, again, can't stand it. And she decides to leave with Ishmael. Now, by this time, 13 years had passed. Ishmael was 13 years old. He was Abraham's only child. And Ishmael was really a father's child. He was a hunter. Nothing was better than eating the product of a hunter. Barbecue. Abraham loved him. Of course he loved him. He was his only child, and he was growing up to be a very frisky child. Now when Hagar leaves, she's not a pregnant woman. She takes Ishmael with her. God tells Abraham, you have to stick with Sarah. I'm still promising you a son and a great nation. But you know what Abraham probably thought to himself? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. You know how long Sarah has been barren? She's already almost 100 years old. But of course, he obeys God, and Hagar and Ishmael leave. And Ishmael becomes the father of the Arab people. But Sarah has a son. He's named Isaac because she laughed. She laughed when she heard that she was pregnant. Now, it's very clear in the Bible that Abraham favored Ishmael. Number one, he was his firstborn. He was entitled to the blessing. Even when God tells Abraham that Ishmael will have a great nation, but that Isaac receives the blessing from God, even at that moment. And I'm quoting directly from the Bible. Abraham said, "May God favor Ishmael." When God tells Abraham that Isaac will receive the blessing, Abraham's response, as we read it, may you God still favor Ishmael. Abraham never gave up. His deep love for Ishmael. Now comes the big climax in the Bible. The famous story of the binding of Isaac. God tells Abraham, take Isaac and I thought this was a sort of a delightful note. God tells Abraham, take Isaac, your beloved son, as though it wasn't obvious that he was the beloved son of Sarah, not Abraham. Take Isaac, your beloved son, offer him up as a sacrifice to me. Now, at almost the same time in the Bible, you have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's nephew Lot had gone to live in Sodom when he and Abraham came down to the land of Israel. And the people of Sodom were wicked people. And God had determined to destroy the city of Sodom and all the people. God was willing to allow Lot to escape, but not otherwise, not the rest of the people. So you have this wonderful story in the Bible about Abraham arguing with God. How can you do that? Not everybody in Sodom is guilty. There must be 50 people there who are innocent. And then the story goes on. All right, if there are 50, I will spare them. If there are 40, I will spare them. Even if there are 10, I will spare them. Abraham is arguing constantly with God. When God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, not one word of protest, not one question. After all, that's God's decision. Well, but look what you did in Sodom. Argued and argued. What I'm pointing out is that it's very clear in the Bible. Had it been up to Abraham, Ishmael would have received the blessing. And that would have been the end at the beginning of the Jewish people. Now let's go on to Isaac. Same story. Only this time, of the two children, both of them are real children of Isaac, Esau and Jacob. Both children to Isaac's wife, Rebekah. And Esau is the older child, born first, legally entitled to the blessing. And again, obviously, Esau is the favored child of Isaac. For the same reason. Esau was a hunter, brought Isaac fresh meat. By now, Isaac become very old, almost blind. And his time is coming close to an end. Rebekah, like Sarah, is desperate. She cannot do what Sarah did. She cannot say to Isaac, send Esau away. It's impossible. They're both the children of Rebekah and Isaac. Now, one might argue that Rebekah was guilty of favoritism. It's a very real problem of parents. The problem is made easier by what turns out with children. As we all know, basically we have very little control over what our children will grow up to be like. We can do the best we can, but for whatever reason, two children can turn out to be very different from each other. And while it creates great problems, there are also some very significant decisions that have to be made for the future. It was obvious that Isaac was the person who was going to be the father of the Jewish people. It was also clear that Jacob was going to be the father of the Jewish people. And so Rebekah made the decision to do a terrible thing, to take advantage of her blind husband, to fool him in order for him to give the blessing to Jacob. It's a profound moral question. There are two values that are conflicting with each other. One is love and honesty, and the other is the well-being of the future. And Rebekah made that decision. Again, I'd have to say, from the point of view of Jewish history, it's very clear that if it had been up to the patriarch, it would have ended right there. Esau became the ancestor of the Edomites, who were the eternal enemies of the Jewish people. You know, from the biblical point of view, Jews could marry anyone who converted to Judaism except an Edomite. So here you have already now Abraham and Isaac, who would have clearly chosen Ishmael and Esau. Now you have the biggest problem of all, and that's Jacob. Now, Jacob eventually receives the name of Israel, and we are all Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Again, Jacob selects a favorite son, Joseph. He makes it very obvious, so obvious that the brothers of Joseph are so fed up with Joseph that first they decide to throw him into a pit and let him die, and then sell him as a slave to an Egyptian. Now, if you look at Jewish history, the Jewish people, for much of their biblical history, were divided into tribes. Joseph was not a tribe in terms of territory in the land of Israel. Instead of that, the two sons of Joseph were the heads of tribes who had territory in Israel. One of them was Ephraim, and the other Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh, children of Joseph. Many centuries later, eventually the tribes united into a kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. And eventually the kingdom of Israel split into two. The northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea. Those are named after the tribes. Judea, after the tribe of Judah, and Israel was led by which tribe? The northern kingdom of Israel was led by the tribe of Ephraim, son of Joseph. Eventually, the northern kingdom of Israel that had been led by Ephraim was destroyed by the Assyrians, became the lost 10 tribes. The southern kingdom, Judea, became the Judeans, and to this day, the Jews. So we see that even Jacob very closely came to destroying the Jewish people. Only barely survived by Judah, the descendants of Judah, the tribe of Judah. All because of the favoritism that the patriarch gave to one child. And in every case, the matriarchs outwitted and outfought the patriarchs, enabling the survival of the Jewish people. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's only in modern times that we have actually recognized the role of the matriarchs to at least being equal to that of the patriarchs. But I think for what we have gathered today, it was really more than equal. It's crucially important that they maintained the direction that was set for them by God in the Bible. But what we are coming to now is the entry into the land of Egypt. Now, I've already indicated why they came to Egypt. And what we're going to take up next time is the emergence of Moses in Egypt to provide new direction for the Jewish people. By that time, by next week, my voice will be restored and you'll all have an easier time. Thank you.